Welcome back. We will start with module 10 today. Module 10 we will cover the communication strategies that children learn and how they learn, what are the some specifics of it, what are some theories of it and so on. So, let us start. This will be our roadmap. Starting with the communication related theory by Paul Grice, that is the rules of communication. Then we will talk about the pre-verbal communication among children, and then follow it up with verbal communication. So, children as we have seen already, we are talking about language acquisition from the prenatal stage. So, as a result of which when they are starting to communicate, then also we will look at from the very beginning. So, even before they have started to talk, even before they have entered the verbal stage, we will look at the pre-verbal stage. So, that is why the difference between the pre-verbal communication and the verbal communication. So, in lecture 2 onward, we will start with the verbal communication. So, there we will talk about speech act and then follow it up with other important paradigms like scalar implicature, reuse of reference words, turn taking, many things like that. So, this is just a roadmap, this is just a pointer, but we might have some things here and there and some extra things as well. So, this is the basic underlying structure which we will follow. So, communication by children, there are two primary stages. First is of course, the without words, that is infancy, role of joint attention and understanding of communicative intent of others will be primarily focused here. So, how early children can understand the intent of others and how early they can make their own intention understood by others, these are things that we will be looking at in the pre-verbal stage. And in doing all of this during this entire process, the role of joint attention is also very important. So, we will talk about it. However, joint attention has been studied in depth in one of the initial modules. So, we will not discuss what it is, we will just talk about how that has been used for communicative purposes by infants as the studies point out. Then we will look at the stage with language. So, with language means what is the child supposed to say, choosing what to say, how do you communicate in a given scenario. So, that is the area which we will talk about with in the language related stage. So, speech act, scalar implicature as we have just talked about, many things like figurative language use and interpretation and so on. So, children by now that we are in module 10, we have already seen that they have figured out the sound structure, the morphological patterns, the use of words, how they find out the meaning of words and eventually syntax. So, basically this is to say that the structural properties of the language by now is in place. Now, what will they do? Now, they will communicate. So, they will communicate in the real world with their peers, with adults and so on and so forth. Now, the main question that we have here is it enough for a child to know the grammatical rules in order to be an able communicator in his or her language? Because as we just saw that they have the structure already in place, structure in the sense of the sounds, morphology, words, syntax and so on. Is that enough? That is actually not the case. So, we know that language is also a tool for communication. One of the main purposes of language is to communicate, and that communication happens within a social scenario. So, it is situated within a particular given backdrop where language has to be used. So, language is not just a system of grammatical rules, this is also a tool that human use to explore social world. We need to this is a tool that we have with which we explore our world, not only to conform, but also to debate or to argue, to find out new ways of life and so on and so forth. So, basically the overall idea of exploring your social world needs language as an important tool. So, we use language for all of these purposes. So, to create, develop and sustain social relationships. So, this is what we mean by exploring the social world. So, in any social setup, language helps us to communicate in a culturally appropriate way. Now, this is very important because language, as I just said, is a social tool, but that does not mean that the kind of language structure that is allowed for a particular society will be applicable for all societies anywhere in the world. That is not how it really works. So, culture specific patterns of using language is also another important thing that the child has to master. So, this takes us to the domain of what is called pragmatics and communicative competence. So, pragmatics is meaning in a given context. So, the sentence might mean structurally speaking it might have semantics, but that semantics in a context is what we call pragmatics. So, making sense in context is the main thing here. So, making sense in context is the key to successful communication in any kind of social setup, any kind of cultural setup. So, for children's pragmatic development, the required skills thus include successful use of contextually appropriate language, that is the production has to be context appropriate, keeping in mind the grammatical part, that is all that has to be there of course, but also it has to be culturally appropriate, and the ability to effectively understand the utterance through multiple social contexts. So, not only they have to use, but also they have to effectively understand. So, the same sentence you can have a very simple sentence like I like tea. So, if it can be a simple sentence and mean exactly what it means, that the person talking about it likes, has a fondness for the beverage called tea, which is a common beverage in India. That can be a simplistic understanding of it. But let us say somebody gives you coffee and then you say I like tea, meaning with a kind of intonation that signals disapproval, that why did you give me coffee, why did you offer me coffee, I like tea. Similarly, let us say if you do not like tea, but somebody gives you tea and then again you sarcastically say I like tea. So, this kind of thing. So, even a single simple sentence can mean different things in different contexts. So, that is where our second point becomes very important, that it is the pragmatics or communicative competence is also about understanding, effectively understanding the utterance through various kinds of social contexts. Now, this is easier said than done, because while semantics might remain unchanged, the same sentence structure might differ in pragmatics, as we have just seen. So, this is the reason, this is a very subtle skill that the child needs to develop, that they need to over a period of time they do develop it, but because this is such a subtle thing and it is a slightly complicated kind of a skill, that is why this takes a little bit longer than understanding or knowing the grammar of a language. Now, there are other things also within this. So, to complicate matters further, the pragmatic abilities also include the interpretation of utterances in a non-literal way. For example, the figurative use of language. Figurative use, for example, metaphor, metonymy and so on, these are called figurative use of language. Now, this is not only restricted to the domain of literature or high end writing, but also in day to day life. We do use a lot of metaphor in day to day life, which is also a very productive way of communicating. You can say a lot by using a metaphor in a simple situation also. The child has to learn even that. So, our communicative competence not only deals with the understanding of simple sentences, but also non-literal. Non-literal as in what it does not mean, whatever is the literal meaning is not the implied meaning. So, all of these they have to learn. So, that brings us to what is the communicative competence. So, we understand this with an example, as I have also already discussed an example. So, you invite your friend to go for a post dinner chai, as we call in India. So, the reply you get is tea keeps me awake. Now, what is the meaning of this sentence? That will depend on who the person is, who the friend is, whether he or she likes tea or not, whether you are actually offering tea or not, multiple things. So, this is where our communicative competence comes in. Similarly, that the example of a teacher that you will find in many textbooks. So, these examples show that successful communication needs to depend on the speaker's intended meaning. which means that situational awareness is an important factor in attaining communicative competence. So, situational awareness is necessary not only for different kinds of life situations, but also in terms of speaking. When you are speaking, you need to be aware of the speaker's or the hearer's mindset. So, if you are the speaker, you need to have you need to be alert as far as the hearer is concerned. So, what is the hearer's mindset? How can you get your point across, or what is the intended meaning that you have? Similarly, when you are the listener, you have to also keep in mind the speaker's intended meaning. So, it is this is kind of a structure, not a structure, it is a process actually. So, this process takes is kind of a slightly below the surface kind of a process. You need to be aware of the other person's mental state at that point of time when the communication happens. Thus, learning to communicate effectively through nuances of situation is called communicative competence. The development of this skill is called developmental pragmatics. Pragmatics, as we just said, that pragmatics refers to meaning in context. So, when that understanding, that competence is developing in child, that is studied, and it is called developmental pragmatics. So, the ability to communicate starts with pre-verbal infants, and of course, gradually we move to verbal communication, more of verbal communication. Now, little bit more on the pragmatic development. So, this refers to the child's ability to figure out that the meaning of an utterance can go beyond what is said. Often that is the case. Not for children maybe, but for adults it is always the case. So, often the case. So, when the child is exposed to adult language or even in the peer group, as they grow, they figure this out, that the meaning, the actual meaning is more than what has been said, and to understand that more part of the meaning, they need to be situationally aware. They need to be aware of the cultural norms of that society. They need to also understand that languages may have non-linear meaning. All of these things have to be in place. So, that means that there is a difference between linguistically encoded and inferentially derived, which is the pragmatic aspects of communicated meaning. So, there are two layers to the meaning, that is linguistically encoded and the inference. So, you infer the meaning. So, if the teacher says, teacher hands you the script and says good work, and then you see you have actually got a bad mark, quite a bad grade, then you have to infer that the teacher was being sarcastic. So, that is what we mean by derived inference. So, the pragmatic meaning depends on the one hand on the speaker's intention, belief and so on, which we discussed as theory of mind somewhere in the initial modules. And so, theory of mind is when the speaker is saying something to me, another person is speaking to me, that my understanding and the speaker's understanding might be different. So, that is what theory of mind is. So, the speaker's intention, belief, plan, goal and so on and so forth have to be kept in mind, which means you have to be aware about the theory of mind. And situational meaning, which is dependent upon culturally sensitive values and concepts. So, basically till now what we have seen is that language can have two layers of meaning, sentences or utterances can have two layers of meaning, the linguistically encoded and the pragmatically derived, inferentially derived meaning. Inferentially linguistically coded meaning has no problem, but inference has problem. Problem as in it is a complex process. It depends on two main factors, the speaker's intention and the cultural background, right. These are the main points so far. Broad timeline, while the basic skills in this, as we will see the examples through a number of studies, there are some of these abilities are there in the very beginning also. Infants are actually much smarter than we thought they were. So, some of these abilities actually develop quite early. However, to master this, they take a long time, sometimes till adolescence or sometimes even beyond. So, the skill, because this skill sharpens through experiences, the child needs to go through multiple contexts of using that particular one particular utterance to understand how this, because nobody really sits the child and explains all of these things. It might happen if the parents are linguists, but otherwise it does not happen. In the normal world, it does not happen like that. So, the child has to figure it out on his or her own. So, that is why, because it is dependent on real life experience, it actually takes longer than the grammatical part, understanding the grammatical part. So, in concrete terms, this means different types of experiences, different types. By different types we mean social, interpersonal levels, because they need to understand that different kinds of, it is not only a situation, but it can also depend on the person per se. So, somebody who is very well versed in the in complex use of a language might use it differently as opposed to somebody else. There are multiple factors about the person in the conversation that also needs to be taken into account. So, when we mean experience, we mean both kinds of experience. So, the social setup that requires a particular way of speaking, simultaneously the person who is either a speaker or a hearer in the communicative context. So, in turn this ability has implications for success in education, interpersonal relationships, and so on and so forth. Why is it important? Why is communicative competence important? Not only for being an able and a good communicator, but also this helps you in there are correlations, positive correlations found in through many studies, that children who have higher communicative competence tend to do well in education sector also. So, they understand the lectures better and so on and so forth, and of course, interpersonal relations are also important. Now, these are some domains that I have looked at it. So, I just thought, though we will not discuss this in detail, but I just thought I will familiarize you with the different kinds of angles through which this has been studied. So, fields like developmental pragmatics, we already talked about it. Sociolinguistics also does, child language acquisition, that is why we are discussing this. Language socialization, etc., are some of the domains that take communicative competence very seriously, and they study as well. So, interaction leading to communicative competence is a fundamental factor here. So, these are some of the domains. Now, what is our problem? Let us get to the problem statement. The critical question that we will be asking here is that how children acquire the pragmatic competence? What are the factors? How do they get there? Are they capable of inferring the intention of others and respond accordingly? If so, how early, and what are the major what are the major milestones in that? Then Grice's influential theory of pragmatics is an important guide for us to get there. So, we will discuss that, and we will see if children are able to reason about others' intentions following Grice. And of course, Grice's theory is a little old now, but the modern theories have also kind of adopted that, if not entirely. So, early work on the development of pragmatic competence among children did not show very positive result, because initially the older studies talked about children acquiring their pragmatic competence in a slightly mildly not so positive way, because they believed, many studies actually showed that children are largely egocentric. They don't really, they are not really worried about the other person's intention. They seem to be very self-centered, they are bothered about their small little world. So, that is what they call egocentric. They do not really worry about the intentions of other people. Now, this also had support from the finding on theory of mind, which we discussed as well before. So, we know that theory of mind as a module develops around the time the child is 4 to 5 years old, not before that. So, it is only when the theory of mind is in place, we can safely say the child is aware of the mental state of others. So, there the fact that people have different mental states, it is possible to have the child's mental state need not match with the mental state of another person. All of these are part of theory of mind. So, it is quite understandable that by the time the theory of mind develops, the child slowly starts to understand the intention of others, not before that. So, early studies kind of provide support to that. However, in recent times we have, like we have seen in so many through so many examples, that now we look at these factors through experimental paradigms. Earlier they were more of observation. So, once the experimental studies came into the picture, now we have different kinds of result. Many of the research findings actually point out to very heightened understanding, a very fine tuned ability of infants to understand fine tuned attributes of children that show that they might actually be aware of the intention of other people. So, anyway we will look at all of them, but let us just quickly go through what are the maxims of Grice. These are called maxims of Grice. According to Grice, communication is a collaborative effort based on intention recognition. So, I need to, when I am talking to somebody, it is not, I have to take into account the other person's standpoint. So, it is basically a kind of a cooperation, collaborative project, so to say. And this collaboration, why does he call it collaboration? Because there are certain rules that both the parties, so the speaker and the hearer need to follow. These rules are known in the literature as maxims of Grice. So, later models of pragmatics have also adopted many of these maxims, though there are some changes with respect to the specific aspects of the theory, but largely this is still understood to be valid. For instance, one of the later theories that have looked that is also quite popular in literature is Preverbal and Wilson's relevance theory, which is also similar, somewhat similar to this one. So, the maxims are maxims of quantity, maxims of quality. Quantity basically refers to one's contribution should be as informative as necessary. So, do not make contribution more informative than necessary. You give only that much information as is required within that particular communicative context. That is the maxim of quality, quantity. Quality is about do not say what you believe to be false. So, do not say that for which you lack adequate evidence. So, if you do not know for sure what you are saying is true, then do not say that. So, not only you should the information that you give should be adequate for that context. Similarly, if you are not sure about something being true, do not say it. Maxims of relation refers to being relevant. Maxims of manner refers to avoiding obscurity of expression, avoid ambiguity, be brief, be orderly. Now, these are the maxims that apparently all communication systems need to be following, because if you do not follow, then the communication will not happen. If you ask something and somebody replies something else, then we have seen this in one of the cases where we discussed about a particular disorder. So, which means that if you do not follow these maxims, then the communication will not be fruitful. So, successful communication needs to follow these rules, and by violating them, the speaker can induce a range of effects like deceit. So, when you lie, when you are trying to deceive somebody by saying something which you know for sure to be untrue, and or you can also one of the results can be sarcasm, one could be humor, and so on and so forth. Thus, according to this theory, children must learn to follow the rules and also learn to identify when these are violated. So, keeping this in the backdrop, now we move to the pre-verbal stage of children. So, infants successfully communicate much before they have spoken their first word. In fact, as somebody has said, that first words are in reality an end point for infants, which emerges only after they have reached several fundamental milestones. So, when they start talking, when they reach the verbal stage, they have actually crossed many important milestones. So, it is not something new. So, as a result of which this stage the pre-verbal stage is called pure pragmatics, because even though they are not using much of language, sometimes they do very limited, depending on it is a case to case basis, it might vary, but largely they will not have the language in place properly, but they can still get their thing done, whatever they want to get done, they can get done. So, communication does take place in absence of language, and that is why sometimes it is called pure pragmatics. So, at this stage children are able to detect eye contact, infant directed speech and contingency. Eye contact is very important. This is also the domain of which later on becomes the domain of joint attention, both initiating joint attention and responding to joint attention. So, eye contact has been studied extensively, and this turns out to be a crucial feature of human communication, because when we even for adult communication, eye contact is very important, and a number of psychological studies have also studied this. So, for infants it has been found that infants prefer to look at faces that make eye contact to them and avoid those faces that are not making eye contact to them. So, this is a proof that babies are born with the ability to detect socially and communicatively salient information. So, this has been taken as a proof. Child directed speech, we have talked about it. So, we have seen that the role child directed speech has in language development when we discussed about nurture. So, across cultures it is common to find spatial intonation pattern for when they talk to children. So, which is called motherese. Now, motherese children typically have a preference for motherese over adult directed speech in the environment from the very beginning. So, by the time they are 5 months old, they can detect affective vocalization and react to it accordingly. Affective vocalization as in the emotion that is there in the voice of mother, is whoever is speaking. So, the mother or the other primary caregiver. So, if there is a positive affect in the voice, the children typically tend to react positively, like with a smile. Similarly, with a negative affect, they also have been found to react negatively. So, such findings show that the child is able to understand the intention of others. So, when somebody is showing you positive emotion, they actually understand it, and that is why they react in the way they do. The third factor that have been looked at is called contingency. This basically refers to social behavior that is contingent upon one's own action. So, we are talking about in the society, when we talk, when we converse, when there is a communicative situation or there is a group of people communicating with each other, some things are dependent on how your own reaction happens. So, if whatever you say as a result of which somebody replies something, if you say x, there will be a reply to x, if you say y, there will be a reply to y, and something like that. So, this is what is called turn taking pattern in a conversation setup. Now, infants, when they are very young, from the very beginning, they actually show very interesting pattern in this regard. For example, they show preference for contingent responses to rather random stimulation. So, if there is a there is a conversation sort of a thing, there is a give and take, there is a turn taking situation, they prefer to react to that rather than some random stimulation. From birth to 9 months, this is the range, they take part in interaction with caregivers. Now, this interaction is pre-verbal, because by 9 months they have not really started to speak. Now, this is why this happens. You must have noticed anywhere there is a this motherese that takes place between the caregiver and the child. The caregiver tends to take every reaction of the child as a response in a conversation. Does not matter whether the child thinks that way or not. Anything, even involuntary sounds like burps or smiles or whatever, even sneezing and yawning, the mother will respond to it as if the child is using them as some kind of a response in a communicative scenario. Now, by doing this, what happens? This is an involuntary, this happens automatically across cultures and across languages. Now, by doing this, what happens is the caregiver provides a scaffolding of interaction. What does it mean? Means that the caregiver is creating a some sort of a likelihood of an actual interaction that is happening, and this is what the child eventually learns. So, something the child says, not says, something child vocalizes some sound, and the mother says, yes, I understand you, you need this, you want that, let's go to granny's, and something like that. So, this is a pattern that the caregiver automatically across languages indulge in, and that in turn tells the child that how turn taking happens, that this is how conversation happens. So, they eventually understand this. So, that because of this particular kind of a structure of conversation is called proto-conversation. These are the beginnings of conversation. This is how the child will eventually be able to actually indulge in a real conversation. This is not a real conversation, it is called proto because this is the older version. Just like we have proto language from where languages have emerged, so the proto is the oldest form. Similarly, proto conversation is the older form of a real conversation. So, this is called a dyadic pattern. Why is it a dyadic pattern? Because this involves only the caregiver and the child. So, this dyadic pattern creates the proto form of conversation. Now, as they grow older, after 9 months of age, children move to triadic conversation from dyadic. So, triadic means from now the child and the caregiver and there is a third thing. It can be an object, it can be an event, it can be anything. So, now they are able to attend to a third thing and there is a triangular kind of a communication that happens involving a third object. So, at this stage the child extends the interaction from the infant caregiver dyad to external objects and situation, and this is where the joint attention makes an entry. So, because both the child and the mother or the father or whoever the primary caregiver, they often need to attend to one particular object together. So, which means joint attention. Let us say this is for an example. Let us say the child is playing with a toy and it flies off her hand. She looks at her mother who points to the direction where it went. The child follows in the direction of the pointing figure. So, the ability of the child to follow the pointed finger of the mother to the toy is an evidence of the child responding to joint attention. So, they looked at each other and that is how you convey that the toy has flown off, and then the mother points and the child responds and figures out where the. So, without using language there has been a successful communication between the child and her mother involving a third object. This is what we mean by the by joint attention, and this is very crucial as we have already seen in a different module already. So, joint attention develops through time. So, between 9 and 12 months actively they start to attract adult attention needed for communication. Infants under 12 months already attentive to positive and negative affect marked in the intonation, exaggerated intonation contours and other attention getting symbols like pointing and gaze. Till 12 months or so, adults take active part in managing the joint attention, and by 18 months infants are equal participant. So, basically infants initially start with responding to joint attention, eventually they initiate joint attention. Now, understanding the speaker's intent is also an important thing. So, this is an example of a 2-year-old boy and his father at breakfast table. The boy talking instead of eating, he is not eating. The father taps the edge of the bowl with a spoon and the boy says, "Herb hitting a bowl." "Father, why was I hitting your bowl?" The boy is now grinning as he picks up his spoon. "Eat cornflakes." So, the boy was not eating, the father taps the bowl and the child understands the intention even though he has not said this in so much of language. He simply had an action which the child understands. So, this is what we mean by understanding the speaker's intent. So, 1-year-olds are already adept at understanding or construing situations, and as we have seen before various other example also. Prelinguistic gestures are also very important in this domain within the prelinguistic preverbal stage. So, infants can express a number of intentions using gestures in the prelinguistic stage, which is again almost universal. So, when they lift their hands, they basically mean lift me up, big smile with response to an offer of something attractive, I want it, vigorous arm waving in response to the same offer, I do not want it, an open mouth, feed me, etc. So, these are called prelinguistic gestures which are also present in the preverbal stage. Another is the pointing gesture. So, this is also important and children tend to use this a lot before they have started to speak so much in that many language, that many words using language. So, pointing gestures emerge around 11 months of age. This is said that this serves 3 general communicative intentions. there are 3 communicative intentions that pointing gestures have been said to encode. First is to share emotion and attitude about reference. So, 12-month-old did not prolong pointing when an adult expressed disinterest. This is a study from Tomasello's group. So, what they found out was that the child was pointing to an object, but when the adult present in the scenario was not showing any interest, he in fact showed disinterest, maybe no, and then the child did not prolong the pointing behavior, but when he showed interest, okay, cool, nice, then the child took it as a positive reinforcement and kept pointing. So, they can use the pointing as a result of which is understood to be an indicator for showing emotions and attitude. To inform others of useful or interesting things, sometimes they can actually use this pointing gesture to inform the adults in the scenario. So, 12-month-olds, again Tomasello's group, 12-month-old infants prolonged pointing to an object whose location the adult did not know. The child knew. The thing was hidden, and when the adult was not in the scenario, the object was hidden. The child knew it, the adult did not. So, he kept on pointing to it. Request help from others in attaining their goals. This is more common. For example, make the adult hand him the toy that he wants. So, these are the 3 primary domains where the pointing gestures have been studied. To sum up till here, the pre-verbal stage, there are these 3 things that we have discussed primarily. In the pre-verbal stage, children possess and develop quite sophisticated pragmatic abilities. What are those pragmatic abilities? They use eye gaze and a repertoire of gestures for this purpose, and they can engage in acts of joint attention and referential communication with their caregiver. So, this is in a nutshell what the pre-verbal stage of communication as far as infants are concerned leads to. So, this is where we end the lecture 1. Thank you.